Alright, we're recording again. Sorry for the cut. I'm glad I stopped it though, because it seems like it wasn't recording properly. I'm good. Well, I'm just gonna upload these two videos together. So sorry YouTube for the cut, but yeah.
How I would act and how I treated my family. I thought I hated them, and actually it was just me hating myself, and I would take that out on them.
99% of the time when someone goes to drugs, addiction, sex, goth phase, anything like that, it's usually them hating themselves, right? If you hate yourself, you'll do all kinds of stupid nonsense.
Despite the apparently successful treatment of the younger sister, the older sister was still acting out, much to the parents' dismay. However, against Dr. Phil's advice and the mother's opinion, the father did not want to send his daughter to an Aspen Group boarding school, as he felt it was not in their best interests, which led once again to Dr. Phil inviting them back on for further discussion on the matter.
Well, we have received hundreds and hundreds of message board postings, emails, and letters about my next guest. Now, here are just a few responses. I was so angry, I was throwing things at my television. This was the most infuriating show I have ever watched. This might be the first time I have actually yelled at my TV screen. Those aren't all from the same person.
This episode billed them as the most frustrating parents, and Dr. Phil's attitude seemed to reflect that, opening up the episode by quoting enraged viewers, and then proceeding to sit down with them and taking them to task on their failings, while spectators frothed at their mouth, a stark reminder of what happens when you...
One of the daughters got help, so they aren't horrible parents, right? They're working on it. It's just tough.
Do not listen to the esteemed Dr. Phil.
Well, here's what you said. I'm really disappointed that your show is only interested in supporting Aspen programs and not other highly qualified programs that could benefit my daughters. Obviously, what's beneficial for my daughters is secondary to what is good for the show and for Aspen. I understand that first and foremost, you have a business to run. Are you serious? Are you serious when you write this? This is offensive to me. I just have to tell you, when I read this, my initial reaction was, I'm done. We have an advisory board. It's like 20 people, the top minds in psychology, sociology, medicine. When we get a story, it goes out to our advisory board, and we ask them for input. One of the top therapeutic residential programs on the globe is the Aspen Group. So we reach out to them and say, hey, guys, will you help us here? We work with dozens of people all over the country. But the collective wisdom is that that's who we're going to contact here.
Other than outwardly admitting that he has a business arrangement and accusing the father of requesting financial support for his own preferences, despite the fact that he never seemingly wrote that, McGraw doesn't really provide much of a real response to the father as to why it's in this girl's best interest to attend a boarding school, other than broad philosophical narratives and expressing how insulted he felt, how he consults all the experts, etc., etc., etc. Dr. Phil is the fucking best, whatever. The Aspen Group is one of the top residential therapeutic programs on the globe. How could you not send your child there?
Is your teen out of control? The Aspen Education Group can help you get that teen back on track. Now, Aspen's nationwide network of programs has been featured on my show for years, and they can help your family too. Now, you can call an Aspen consultant today to learn more about their outstanding residential and outdoor programs.
Well, a large majority of the Aspen Group's projects have been closed down or sold in the last decade. In fact, there is not a single boarding school still being operated by them, with a fair few scandals that were well known by the time that Dr. Phil went on his verbal crusade against the father.
Well, glee for a former teacher and sex charges? Come on, we're talking about a boarding school for children. Of course there's going to be sex charges. Why wouldn't there be? Of course there's going to be child abuse. Why wouldn't there be? And you're going to say, Paul, that, Don, that's really bad way of looking at it. Nah. It's called looking at humanity and looking at how terrible people are. So I see these, and I always said it was just a matter of time. I'm not looking at it as, like, it's a good thing. I'm looking at it as, like, yeah, figured.
including one to a boarding school that resulted in an investigation that concluded that the agency had reasonable cause to believe that abuse or neglect occurred at the school 6 months before this episode. Another place, formerly known as Island View, has had so many controversies it would be funny if the stories weren't deeply depressing, including one in which a girl was fully isolated for 58 days after running away, an isolation in which she had to rely on staff attention to even interact with anyone, which did have its occasional failings. Dr. Phil was even sued relating to one of these stories a few years later, but came out on top that time.
I believe in these folks right here.
Those
I believe
folks.
They have traction.
Who are these
folks? If you want to get Alexis there, and Aspen is still willing, after all of this, and what I consider to be disrespect from you about their motives, then, you know, I will make that available to you.
I don't know. Right? I feel maybe this whole Aspen Group gig isn't everything it's cracked up to be. And actually, whether by intent or not, the father was in the right.
Absolutely.
But the Dr. Phil's reputation preceded it. Dr. Phil knows what's best for your children. He has files on top of files. And if you're to suggest otherwise, you're giving in to your offspring's manipulative ploys that have driven a wedge between you and the rest of the family. It's a shtick, and it's one that wasn't always completely applicable, particularly when the real-world evidence didn't exactly support what was being promoted. And when you're dealing with young people, that's not something that can be remedied. And with so many places of debatable standing, it was only a matter of time until one came to the forefront of public discussion.
Turnabout. We're going to...
Turnabout Ranch in the wilds of Utah is a leading American brat camp. It's a real working ranch run by cowboys.
Many of you probably don't remember this or even know about it, but in the early 21st century, there was this series that had some international presence known as Brat Camp. It was most popular in the UK, where it ran for 5 seasons, but did have some counterparts in continental Europe and even a US series. As you can maybe guess, the premise was built around adolescents with behavioral and substance issues going to a camp and having those issues addressed. However, this wasn't any standard therapy center. This was more a wilderness camp.
They teach the kids the ways of the Wild West and believe a strict regime of chores, tough rules, and harsh punishments can turn bad kids into good kids.
I have all the compassion in the world for these people, for these kids, but I just lack a little sympathy because of the way their behavior is, and that's what we need to work on.
In the UK, the first season was such a resounding success, they decided to invest in a second series. However, the producers of this show decided to raise the stakes by casting more challenging teens with intensified drama. Upon hearing this, the ranch that was featured in the first series, Red Cliff Ascent, refused to host another series, stating that they were a treatment program, not a TV show. Completely fair. So the team behind Brat Camp set their sights on another location, this being Escalante, Utah, the home of a humble spot known as Turnabout Ranch. Turnabout Ranch is one of the many haciendas that have taken on the role of doubling up as a center for wilderness therapy. This sort of therapy is different to the traditional idea as such. It promotes living with the land, devoid of the privileges or luxuries that modern life has typically afforded us. However, Turnabout Ranch was certainly on the more austere side of these projects. It wasn't Malibu, to say the least.
Christian values.
Everybody get up now. Slumber party's over. Get up. Quit talking.
Are they in prison? They sent them to prison? Dude. This is horrifying. I would hate... Dude. This is why I have this support for people. Because there's people like this that just horrify kids. No wonder kids are messed up nowadays. This nonsense.
Everybody down here now. Out of bed, let's go.
Oh, Jesus. Go.
Foul language not appropriate. Foul language not appropriate. No talking. You're going to spend 3 days out there. It's going to be 3 of the worst days you've spent a long time in your life.
It's going to be
hell.
You're
going to hate every second of it. It's going to be a lot of tears, a lot of emotions.
I want you to know, kids, that you're probably going to just commit suicide, take knives to your thighs, and I'm just, you know, it's going to be real bad. You're not allowed cursing, but I'm going to curse at you. Just make sure you know you don't have to feed yourself or you're going to starve. And there might be some flaming sticks on the ground. You might light yourself on fire. Don't worry about it. Oh, don't get poisoned by the snakes either. That's okay. They're around. You're smart enough not to deal with it. Yeah, but we won't help you if you get poisoned. You'll probably die. Yeah.
So if you want to make it 5 days, it's your choice. But I'm not going to put up with it.
In most American camps, the impact stage is used to physically exhaust rebellious kids into being more compliant. But at Turnabout, they have a unique strategy. For 3 whole days, the kids are made to stay in a small stone circle in total silence.
In hindsight, it's hard not to understand why these sorts of shows aren't being aired today. They're a pretty cruel form of therapy, and although some people did manage to turn their lives around, others didn't, and one former contestant of another series even died in 2009. How these sorts of residencies continued long after the end of the TV shows that documented their methods. In fact, Turnabout in particular went on to be one of the most popular resorts for teens featured on a popular daytime show. I wonder what that show could be.
From the Aspen Education Group. She's one of many groups that we work with. She works with Turnabout Ranch.
Dr. Phil has always made a point of not approaching people from the same perspective that many TV show hosts did. His conversations with troubled people always staged more like an intervention rather than an interrogation, though sometimes the former did seep into the latter. With this in mind, although Dr. Phil did want people to take responsibility for their actions, it wasn't like they weren't deserving of humane treatment and sympathy. However, those who were most troubled, he sent them to Turnabout Ranch. That in many ways seemed very much against what he regularly preached on the show. Turnabout Ranch wasn't a particularly friendly place. It was the sort of place where if you struggled more, you'd receive more severe treatment, as documented in Brat Camp and in testimonies by others. Yet in 2010, Turnabout Ranch made its debut on the Dr. Phil Show with an inspirational segment featuring former guests and a softly spoken rancher.
This guy's UK or British. I probably said that and Seth's probably all pissed. Makes fun of me because of my English language of the Americans, the American language.
Being here helped me find happiness.
When Elena first arrived
here made me not want to kill myself because I was with animals and I was hurting real deep inside, and I don't want to do drugs no more. They treated me terrible. I got scared. It was really scary, so I think to kick my drug habit real fast. Plus, there's some cute animals. That's right.
She was very resistant.
I was furious. Like, I hate everyone.
And she really turned and made some major progress.
After a couple of days, I was like, wow. It is my fault. I got myself in this situation.
She really shines as one of our leaders, and she takes a lot of pride in what she does.
Ironically enough, this debut clip featured the girls who I mentioned earlier, most notably Elena, the younger sister who seemed much more receptive to the ranch's treatment. The ranch was presented as a hands-on getaway where youngsters could build a closer relationship to the wildlife and garner a greater appreciation for those around them. It seemed pretty positive. However, as Elena's older sister showed, it wasn't a formula that worked for everyone. In spite of this though, McGraw & Co. proceeded with a pretty close partnership over the following years, sending many troubled teens here, leading up to arguably our most high-profile case, Danielle Bregoli.
Why don't you want to go to the ranch?
I'd rather go home and just go back to school, do what I gotta do.
Are you gonna resist going?
I have to go from here?
I believe so.
Y'all got 5 seconds, this camera smell on my face before I punch both of y'all in your mouth. I swear to God on everything. Y'all better both get these cameras from my face. I ain't playing with none of y'all right now, bro.
I don't like this one. Look, I deal with a lot of people like this, right? And it's not sending them to some ranch, okay? Because that's cruel. You know what it is? It's being kind and considerate. It's called sitting down with them every day and listening. And that's it. Because if you do more than that, you're only going to push them away.
Danielle Bregoli was always a bit of an exceptional individual, and after her appearances on the Dr. Phil Show, McGraw felt there was no other option than to send her to the Turnabout Ranch. After all, it was always his answer to those he viewed as the entitled generation. Bregoli was a person who continuously undermined Phil and all those who tried to help her, and as a last resort, perhaps a more challenging environment would aid her outlook. So at the end of 2016, she spent 4.5 months in Turnabout Ranch, and whatever she experienced there...
4.5 months? Dude. What torture. Phil, what are you doing to this girl?
Didn't have any lasting impact, as not too long after, she appeared back on the Dr. Phil show, ever defiant in her nature.
When you were at Turnabout, you said that you'd learned that material things didn't mean as much anymore.
That was just a show, damn. That was just so I can get out of there. Let me put it this way. Y'all could put me in a program for 6 years and I'm gonna come out the same person I came in.
How is it being back home?
I don't know, it's just home.
What do you want to tell Dr. Phil?
What I told him last time. Them my
What do you want to see happen on the show this time?
This time I won't be throwing water at nobody, I'll be throwing hands at somebody.
By then, it should have been clear that the Turnabout Ranch didn't really function for everyone, but upon her return, it was framed like the failure of such therapy was Bregoli's own fault, when in reality, it was clear that the Dr. Phil format wasn't ever effective for someone so aware of their own media presence like Bregoli. She knew what the point of Turnabout Ranch would be. Why would she conform to those expectations when her whole existence is based on rebellion? Not many people stop to think that maybe Bregoli wasn't to blame. Phil would probably suggest the fact that she seemed to behave better at Turnabout Ranch meant that it must be the fault of the home environment. But if it genuinely worked in transforming Bregoli's mindset, a change in environment wouldn't affect that. She just cottoned on to the fact that if she didn't cause as much disruption, they'd likely be friendlier towards her. However, that's not a philosophy adopted by everyone. You see, in the time between 2010 and 2017, Turnabout Ranch had been involved in numerous...
Absolutely. Think about it this way. You're in prison, right? Well, as a prisoner, you want to leave prison. So you act nice, you do good things, you pretend to be good, you pretend to be nice, so they lower your sentence. But most prisoners that leave prison go back to prison. It's escapism. They're doing it because they know they'll be treated better. Of course, this is the most common thing ever. Anyone could figure this out.
Controversies, including a lawsuit which alleged torture, another patient that claimed a covered-up sexual assault case, and probably the most significant situation, an actual homicide that occurred during Danielle Bregoli's time at Turnabout Ranch.
Of course.
Clay Brewer, a disturbed teen who had been sent there to receive treatment, attacked a staffer with a blunt object who subsequently succumbed to their injuries. This was during the controversial circle therapy shown earlier, which isolates individuals and is supposed to give them time to think about their lives. But in the wrong environment, it's completely valid to see how this would also be detrimental to an individual.
Yeah.
Now, it should be clear that when something awful happens, there has to be a level of responsibility accepted by the individual, even if they're a minor. But there also has to be some question about...
No. I'm going to give... that this woman was spending 3 days in a circle. She killed a 61-year-old man. Does she need to go to juvie? Maybe, right? I'm going to say that's probably yes. But at the same time, maybe just a psychiatric facility. She's just crazy. We're talking about a patient that's just a little bit out there. So I could say that she could probably get out of a court case by, not being right in the head. She'll have to go to a mental facility instead. So yeah, I would say, this isn't really her fault. Because her brain isn't there. Now, the 61-year-old man, she probably hated because it was probably like one of those people that are like, I'm going to leave you in the desert and die by the poison. And you're saying, darn, well, that 61-year-old man probably had a family, kids, and whatever. Well, that's too bad. Well, what are you doing to these kids? That's your fault. This is the job. You've taken the risk. You've provided yourself. You're dealing with troubled kids. This is a risk. No, I'm going to say that this kid who stole money, right, who killed someone, still deserves help because she's a kid.
How, with all this considered, Bregoli was meant to come back the happy-go-lucky teen next time. If this was just going to be swept under the rug and people were going to act like patients should just take it in their stride, then they probably had another thing coming. And eventually they did.
Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
The almighty public.
The 21st century definitely prompted us to take a different perspective on talk shows in general, and the tabloid genre was no exception, especially given that it often generated the most controversy out of any form of that entertainment.
I've heard some crazy stories over the years, but one topic that keeps me scratching my head is when women fake being pregnant.
Okay, so this is Shane, and he says gay people are disgusting and weak. Right here, we've got Greg. Greg says that he is terrified of gay people.
Even in the early days of the genre, incidents had occurred that raised questions.
Dude, those shows would not be around today. Like, could you imagine? Could you imagine that? Like, think about me. Once if I invited a person onto my show and he started, you know, just throwing homophobic slurs out, I would be canceled so fast. The show would be over. Like, everywhere off the internet. You're done. Even just bringing that up.
About the ethics of this content, most notably in 1995, when on an episode of the Jenny Jones shows, Scott Amateur, a gay man, had expressed love for their male friend Jonathan Schmitz. While this confession was seemingly brushed off at first by the male friend, 3 days later, Amateur died at the hands of him. Lawsuits and interviews subsequently revealed that the producers of the show had misled Schmitz into thinking that his admirer was a woman, while being aware of his history of mental disturbance and alcohol/substance abuse. Although not solely responsible for Amateur's death, there was little doubt that the actions of the show provoked a tragedy while disregarding a culture that was still very hostile towards people of differing sexual preferences. It was clear that when dealing with such sensitive topics, there was a lack of diplomacy in the pursuit for ratings, and this could easily have negative consequences. Nonetheless, this also worked to the genre's advantage. As it
the answer, attention rate is a gold mine. So everyone wants that attention rate for advertisers. So they don't care about hurting people. They don't care about putting these people such as these in their background and whatever. As long as they sit and watch the ads, that's what they care about. It's the business perspective. You're absolutely right. Yeah, you're looking at the money, the monetary value of these shows, and that's what they care about. Not anything else would just be falsifying a narrative.
Reported to show the uglier side of humanity. Therefore, certain incidents were going to be inevitable. Whether it was even fair to show these in the first place is a question that I'll get to later. But in cases such as Jeremy Kyle, it was clear that mistreatment of people was so commonplace because it was expected. And in both cases of Jones and Kyle, these shows were only ever fully reprimanded when someone actually died. Hell, the Jenny Jones show continued for an additional 8 years after the death of the aforementioned guest. Dr. Phil was different though.
You've got to miss siblings. You've got to miss those that
I think about it every day. Like, I miss my twin sister. I miss my brother. I miss all of them, really.
You don't have to miss Abba because she's here. Abba, come on out.
Abba, is that you?
Although he wasn't afraid to tackle the tough subjects, he still did it with the narrative of helping and supporting these people who he knew, as a professional, were still encountering some form of struggle regardless of what they may have done. Therefore, in spite of the space that he operated in, Dr. Phil still had a reputation to uphold. And as someone who had been under fire for the past few years and embroiled in lawsuits, this was certainly going to be a challenge. The era that we live in is also quite different to that of 1995. The online world definitely enabled an interconnectivity that allowed people to spread their messages more effectively. And by establishing himself as an online presence, thanks to the help of platforms like YouTube and those who existed there, he also opened himself up to criticism from the platform, and by 2021, it had long been brewing. The thing about YouTube is that it's a two-way street. If you have a public spat or altercation where you platform that person, there are very few plugs that can be pulled on another person's ability to broadcast publicly, and you could very easily provide them a platform through your own actions. This was exactly the case with Danielle Bregoli, who by 2021 went by the name of Bad Baby, and was well known outside of YouTube. However, in April she returned to the platform that immortalized her, with the intent on presenting our esteemed TV host with an ultimatum.
So, Dr. Phil, I am going to give you from now till April 5th to issue an apology, not only to me, but to Hannah and any other child that you sent to Turnabout or any other program like this. And if you don't, I'm gonna handle things my way. Somewhere in the middle of August, I went on the Dr. Phil show, and my mom and my grandma knew they were sending me here. I didn't know I was going. I went school shopping.
Jade Kind Gom, first boyfriend. Thank you for following. Yeah, I'll be your friend. Be your best friend. Yo, what? how you doing today? You doing good? Can I send videos and songs? You can send me links, yeah. No songs though, because these are being uploaded to YouTube. These reaction videos that I'm doing, but we will be finishing this one, and then yeah, you can send me one. I'm gonna put it on the list. Doing horrible. Why is that, man? Go ahead. Tell me your life story. I'm highly interested. I've been up for the last like 20 hours. That's why I'm up in the morning. I'm not usually up. It's 10 a.m. here. Where I'm at. I'm still alive. I think that's everyone's problem, right? Like, that's a community problem. That's the problem of every human being in the world. Like, I don't think someone comes around and goes like, I'm glad I woke up with my horrible chronic depression. Yeah, that sounds about right. Let's do that. Yes, once I'm not alive, I'm okay. That's debatable. Like I said and do in my reactions on YouTube. Like, that depends if you're in hell or in heaven, right? Have you been a good person? Like, do you believe that you're gonna be in paradise? Because once you're like, you know, you got people. It depends, really, right? That's I don't know if you can really say that. I had 3 suicide attempts fail, so I guess I'm immortal. You know, my ex-girlfriend, you know, tried to take suicide pills. She cut her thighs open, and all this stuff. It's pretty commonplace, right? Do we have ads? Jay, do you have ads? Why does it say ad break in progress? Are we really having ads right now? Bruh. Alright, let's keep playing the video.
Stopping right before, because the school was supposed to start when I got home from LA from doing the show. So part of the whole Dr. Phil show is they send these kids to either Turnabout or these other programs that are also in Utah, but they're all wilderness programs and they're all fucked up.
This video not only called out the modus operandi of the show, but also the treatment at Turnabout Ranch and the supposed therapy that they received there.
So for the first 3 days you're there, there's no showering. They put you in a circle, which is it's a teepee. It's a little teepee, but it's open, and you have to sit there for 3 days. They wouldn't let me lay down for nothing. Like, I was falling asleep, and they were like, get up, get up. So I'm just sitting here, like, this is gonna be really bad. When I seen these people have no sympathy, I was like, oh, I'm really doomed. They take away, like, necessity privileges, like sleeping on a bed, eating good food, not being cold, witnessing it. If you reported another kid, like, getting bullied by like their peers or something, they would just say, well, maybe that's what they need, or like something like that. Even though there was written rules,
basically they sent the kids to hell on earth. If a staff was angry at the moment, or if you just did something that they felt was bad, you would get your own punishment. Like, they would make up their own punishment for you. So it's really frustrating, because even if you don't know the rules, if you fuck up, you're still in trouble. There's not no I didn't know. Absolutely, they're sending these kids to hell on earth.
Deep shit. They had no problem holding kids down, which is against the law. You're not supposed to touch the kids, but they had no problem.
They probably paddled them. They did
it the old. It's just our word against the staff's word when you're there.
Dr. Phil sent the kids to Utah. All right, Utah ain't like the rest of America. We're talking about America, right? Here's America. Here's Utah. Okay, they do some weird things in Utah. Wasn't there someone that married a 12-year-old girl in Utah just the other couple days ago? Right? Like, what are we even talking about? This woman, of course, I paused at a really strange time, but come on, Phil, why are you sending kids to Utah? What are you doing?
Because there's no witnesses, there's no cameras, you don't have a phone, there's none of that. That's why I was always so scared to speak out, because it's like, no one's gonna believe me.
Now, yes, this is, of course, a personal testimony.
Absolutely.
However, looking at the episodes of Brat Camp that I had archived, this all seemed very feasible. For some, of course, this would seem like appropriate disciplinary measures against an ill-mannered teen. However, this was also never really explained on Dr. Phil, and as a matter of fact, whenever discussing Turnabout Ranch, footage would always be shown of an activity more wholesome, such as horse riding.
Oh yeah, horse
riding. I doubt that was
news.
unintentional.
One morning I was cleaning up for breakfast, and one of the staff members was standing right next to me, and she had her walkie on her, so I heard everything. One of the kids, he had tried to steal a car or something. Everyone was screaming on the walkies like it was really crazy, and he ended up killing one of the staff members. They made all the kids that were at Roundy come down, and then they told us not to tell us anything. A day later, they have us all, every kid that's at Turnabout, they have us all sit in a circle, and they're like, listen, there was an incident, I know some of y'all heard it over the walkies, Jimmy died. And so we're all freaking out, because Jimmy was, like I said, he was one of them that was there the first day I got there. He was really sweet. Not only did Jimmy die, but
of course, the nice one died. It wasn't the douchebag, it was the nice one. See, that's how the world works. God takes the people that are the nicest first. But if you're putting kids to the brink, especially if they are troubled and drug addicts and such, of course they're going to try to kill you. Why wouldn't they have expected this?
Other staff members that was there at the time, Alicia, who was the daughter of the nurse. Alicia, she was injured, and 2 years later she died, and she was also left disabled after being attacked by Clay.
Brigoli's recounting of the Turnabout Ranch goes over many unnerving details, including that relating to the death of the staffer, and how that would understandably affect a young person residing there. However, there are more details she wanted to reveal.
A young lady, her name is Hannah, she recently spoke out because while she was there, she was sexually assaulted, and then when she reported that she was assaulted, she was punished by staff. Now,
Wait a second. They sent the kids there and it was repeated sexual abuse? They sent the troubled kids there for help. And they got, like, their, like, little dinglings tickled and their buttholes poked. Like, that's not good. That's really bad. Like, look at them. What are they even doing? Kingdom, I genuinely hope that you don't do that. I really hope that you don't. That would be... Look, I know I just met you, dude. Right? But that would make me pretty sad. I would be pretty sad. How, you don't know me? That's not how that works. That's not how my mind works. Right? If you left this planet by committing suicide, like, obviously you don't know me. You don't know me. What if I told you... Okay, what if I told you that I was a deacon for the Catholic Church and I run a support group for people with depression? Would that change your mind and make you come to terms with why I care if you were gone? And if you ever left, that I would be devastated? I live in a place where I care about everyone that talks to me. Everyone that just sits, I sit and listen to people. That's sort of what I'm known for. No, because you wouldn't know. I would take that as true. You can say that, but I would take it as, you know, deep down, possibly, you know, maybe in my soul, that I could just have to think about that. You know, if you don't come back, I would just have to think about you. So you can't be sad something you don't know about. I wouldn't say that. I can be sad over many things. Just because you ignore or have negligence over something, assumptions can be sad. If you never came back and I don't hear from you again, I can make an assumption. Not over my death, though. Yeah, but think about it this way. If not me, right, there's someone in your life that would be horribly depressed over that. Right? Who probably don't remember me. That's not how my head works. You've not been to one of my streams. Especially because I have to upload this to YouTube. I have to re-edit these videos, so I'll definitely see you again. But, no, just think about it that way. Isn't there someone in your life that would be like, I would be really depressed if he left. Not really my problem if they depressed if I'm already dead. Yeah, but once if you're up there looking down on someone and being... You would feel bad for the people that are depressed that you're gone. You know what I'm saying? You're up there, you know, you're walking with God asking him questions, and you would look down and be like, I'm so sorry that I had to put all these people through this. Right? That I would. And I don't know if I could even stand there thinking about that. Elena Kristen, thank you so much for following. I'll be your friend, absolutely. If you have any video requests, do post a link right now. We're talking about Kingdom here. He was talking about his 4th suicide attempt, or her, I'm not sure, they. And I'm saying that, yeah, the world would miss him. I would miss him. I just met him. Absolutely. That's, like, it's absolute. It's not even close. And I do hope you enjoy the show.
Seeing the punishment she was given, I knew, like, okay, I really have to say something. Like, I really have to have her.
When you go to hell? Well, that's if you believe hell exists. I don't believe hell exists. I just believe that you have a chance to go to heaven. If you don't, you got to try again. You can do your best. Let's give you a shout out, Lena. Let's see what you're playing. You are playing nothing. Do you have any clips? No. That's okay. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate that. Remember to chat. I answer every question. It's kind of what I'm
back on this because I truly believe that they did that.
This claim covered the alleged violation of someone who was staying at the ranch at the same time and how she was treated by personnel when she...
Let's put it this way. If you're sending your kid to a ranch to get help when they're troubled students, this is just... I'm just expecting... Like, I'm literally just expecting them for something like this to happen. Like, it's not even a question. I'm waiting for this assault to happen. Just like before, like, we're talking about human beings here. And they're awful people. Humans are awful people. Let's not get it twisted.
She complained about it.
It's
it
just
was
a matter
that Bergoli took very seriously, and with this information, it was easy to understand why she expected at the least an apology.
If it's on YouTube, it should be fine. Just make sure there's, like, if there's just no music in it. We don't want copyright strikes because all these VODs will be uploaded, re-uploaded back to YouTube.
Apology from the man himself. Would they receive it? Well, not really. Around a week after the publication of the video, Dr. Phil made an appearance on Ashley Banfield's show, News Nation, to discuss this matter further. This was a pretty significant moment in the show's history, as Dr. Phil had very rarely taken to interviews to address situations which may question his character, outside the show at least. However, after a few minutes, you begin to see why.
Well, you know, she went to Turnabout 4 or 5 years ago, and she had a bad experience. You know, obviously, I would hate that. We'd be sorry about that, but we don't have anything to do with what happens with guests once they leave the stage. I mean, that's...
Yeah, but he's promoting this. Of course Dr. Phil's in the wrong here. She's the one that sent them there. Yeah. He's making an excuse. He's defending... Why is there a cricket? That cricket is calling Armageddon. Okay? It's going to feel my wrath one day. It is sitting under a bookshelf, and it's so upsetting.
Between the guardian and the parent and whatever facility they go to.
So he does say that he would be sorry if she'd had a bad experience. I suppose that is a half apology, but I don't think there's that much question that she had a bad experience.
It's that he's defending himself. There's nothing to defend. He's in the wrong.
The sound of it, regardless of whether what she's saying is 100% honest. I don't think we need any ifs at this point if that's the threshold for an apology.
What else is there but some tough love, you know, at a ranch or where else? You can't coddle kids like that.
He also seems to distance himself from his own personal involvement in Turnabout Ranch.
But you sit and listen and act like a normal person.
And although I would say it's difficult to hold Dr. Phil personally responsible for the actions of another individual, this still isn't an honest reply.
YouTube? Let's see here. The Glory Season 1 Seeks Women Korean Drama Recap. Alright, we will play this after we finish this episode. Let me copy the link and make sure I have it here. We were sent 2 Right Opinion videos, but this one's a lot shorter than the other Right Opinion, so we're going to hold that. We'll do that after this. Thank you so much.
To be frank, the idea that they have absolutely no involvement is just preposterous. The countless promotional videos, the unrivaled, unquestioning praise, they all say far much more than McGraw can say in a single interview. Dr. Phil was extremely enthusiastic about the organizations that he worked with, even to the point of roasting parents who didn't agree. He could have acted shocked when confronted with this information, and it would have been more convincing than him saying they don't have anything to do with these places once they're out of Dr. Phil's care.
So we're not involved in that. We don't have any feedback from them. So whatever happens once they're there, that's...
Wait, she was a rapper? I should have realized with the way she was talking. She mumbles a lot. Look at that. You shut up, cricket. See? That's all it takes. You yell at the cricket, it gets quiet. Anyway, no wonder we couldn't understand her.
Between them and the facility. I assume she had a problem. She filed a complaint with the proper authorities or something 5 years ago. So I really don't know much about it.
Of course he doesn't know much about it because he's like an actor. He's not gonna
programs on the
he's not going to care once they leave. His job's over. He's not a real psychologist. He gave up his license.
Glow.
Yeah, right.
Oh, we haven't had. Skip it.
Tonight on an all-new episode, The Dangers of Dr. Phil.
Okay.
Legal. Edited by Ladbob.
A few months after the video and the subsequent Dr. Phil interview, it was announced that the victim of the violation that Brigoli had spoken about, Hannah Archuleta, was initiating a lawsuit against Dr. Phil and their collaborating studios for the participation in sending children to Turnabout Ranch,
okay.
Or supposedly being aware of the many controversies that
they
the
are
center
in
had
every
been
right
involved
to
in
do
since
that.
the early 2010s. We'll address the result of that in a bit, but it definitely posed the question of how ignorant Dr. Phil could be to the many problems that seemed evident to any onlooker, and these qualms would only be heightened as the industry looked more inward to address problems of workplace culture. 2020 was an interesting year for many reasons. However, as many viewers of this channel may recall, it was the year where the conduct of certain talk show hosts was brought into question, and their otherwise beloved reputation challenged. Probably the most notable example of this was Ellen, who many claim was an
we all know about Ellen.
person to deal with, while the working conditions behind the scenes of her supposedly lovable show were comparable to that of an authoritarian regime. Needless to say, whether you believed in every story's verity or not, the effect it had on the show was evident, with ratings plummeting. And barely a couple years later, the Ellen DeGeneres show was brought to an end after 19 seasons of mostly enjoyed success. The allegations certainly shook up the industry to say the least, and lifted the veil on the often hushed workplace culture that had seldom received scrutiny.
Let me guess, Dr.
For many,
Phil
it was
has
a
some
bad
kind
experience,
of
but up
rough
until then,
workplace
many
culture,
former
right?
employees had likely viewed it through the lens of any other job. The difference is when you're dealing with celebrities who preach the principles that aren't necessarily reflected in their private persona, there's a disingenuousness to their trade that makes you feel compelled to call them out. However, while this was new in many corners of the industry, arguably the tabloid talk shows should have been the most conscious of this. They've been long subject to criticism regarding maltreatment of those around them, especially given the often sensitive and revealing topics surrounding their guests. As a matter of fact, in 2016, Dr. Phil and his producers had already been sued by a former employee who had claimed they were falsely imprisoned during a meeting, where McGraw had locked the doors and threatened employees after information had leaked. The producers of Dr. Phil subsequently countersued,
what do you think about Dr. Phil?
Who worked as a producer and director, had lifted footage from the production that infringed on the copyright, employment, and confidentiality rights of the show. In the end, the judge sided with the producers, and the potential for further publicity seemed to burn out.
Is that Pokimane? Next to Dr. Phil? Nah, I'm mistaken. No way that's what that is. I think that's
wrong.
At
first, it seemed that Dr. Phil had avoided the blast radius of the talk show apocalypse. But barely a few months before Ellen's final episode on February the 11th, 2022, 2 present and 10 former employees came forward to attest to a work environment that was anything but
200 biddies? Thank you for the biddies. I really appreciate that. I love it so much. You didn't have to do. I don't. I really appreciate that, but no one has to do that and feel better. I really do appreciate it, though. Let's go ahead and give you another shout out. But yeah, I do want your opinion on Dr. Phil. Love to hear it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Therapeutic. In many ways, the allegations against the Dr. Phil show followed a similar narrative to those that had sunk.
Usually on donations, I would dance or do something drastic, but it's too early in the morning for that. I'm sorry. Normally, I would.
Ellen a couple years before. Although employees on the article did not directly witness McGraw berating or abusing employees, many of the producers acted tyrannically towards those working on the show, engaging in behavior that caused serious upset and discomfort. With how systemic and widespread the problem was in the workplace, many found it difficult to believe that an accomplished, observant psychologist and TV host would merely be ignorant to these incidents, with one being quoted as saying, "How can he not know?" Most of this
because at this point, the man isn't a psychologist anymore. He is a entertainer, and he doesn't really care about anything that isn't benefiting him in his business. That's what we're getting from this. All right? Nothing more, nothing less. This man is an entertainer now.
The control room, which employees described as a war zone, with yelling, insults, and all-round disrespect for employees who worked in those high-pressure conditions. The one public testimonial in this article comes from Tiffany Clark, who briefly did some work on behalf of Paramount. She said that during her short tenure, she was mercilessly berated by a supervisor who threatened jobs and openly bragged about making other employees quit. This information tells us a story endemic to many LA productions, and if you remove the names, you probably wouldn't be able to tell it from a show like Ellen. However, there was an aspect that set these claims apart from your usual studio hellhole. Now, as we noted, there are multiple testimonies that assert that the show subtly nudged guests towards problematic behavior that may be connected with the struggles they were encountering, nearly all of whom are from the guests themselves and their relatives. However, in this case, the employees appear to back up these claims.
Well, I've been watching this for an hour and 44 minutes here, and I've determined that he has lied, falsified helping people, sending kids to a place where they have been sexually abused and or killed someone, and then sent a child to a place in Florida to help get off drugs where then the CEO of the company was a drug addict. Like,
multiple stories regarding the instruction they received when handling the show's participants. These included being encouraged to perpetuate racial stereotypes, not being properly equipped to deal with mentally vulnerable guests, and even one case where an employee claims they were directed to make sure a guest did not take their medication before going on stage.
Oh yeah, there was a bunch of employees. There was an alcoholic coming onto the show, and his parents didn't want him to drink. He was like, what, 14? And they put vodka in his room and took his parents out and didn't know, and he chugged it before coming on the freaking broadcast.
Former members of staff also say they were advised to manipulate and befriend guests in an attempt to obtain bookings for the show, while profiling them on a variety of fronts. This is partially substantiated by an excerpt from an email that commends workers for convincing guests that they're trusted confidants, but reminding them to keep their distance, as said guests will likely throw them under the bus. Not the sort of sympathetic outlook on guests that you'd expect.
How bad is the cricket? Like, can you hear that? You can't hear that, right? Or is it the end of the world? Because this cricket in my background is the end of everything. It's terrible.
From Dr. Phil. By this time, such claims of workplace misconduct were becoming more and more pervasive. And for such an environment, maybe that wasn't surprising. It seems to be a deeply ingrained cultural issue. However, the one aspect that should always be prioritized in this sort of show is the safety of guests, who genuinely need help above anything else. Something that Dr. Phil has always publicly preached. This didn't appear to be a cultural misstep. This seemed to be intentional. and for that there were much more serious ramifications.
Okay.
As always, it's important to present both sides, and as many other stories reported,
well, he went on
the team behind
BuzzFeed.
Dr. Phil did respond, firstly denying any of the allegations regarding treatment of staff and guests, while also referring their own members of staff to the publication in support of their perspective. Their angle was that yes, filming of a show like Dr. Phil could be intense, especially considering the unpredictability of those involved. However, nobody has been abused, nobody has been treated unfairly, and nobody was subjected to any forms of profiling or stereotyping under the watch of a show's executive. We can't support one experience unquestionably without taking into account the other experiences, and obviously the producers offered individuals who contradicted the accusatory testimonies written in the article. However, the report definitely outlined a continuing narrative on the Dr. Phil show, one that it was struggling to shake off. This isn't the first time that such claims have been made, and although an intensive workshop may create disgruntled employees, it's hardly a complete explanation for the often corroborating stories from supposedly separate sources. All I'd say is that in this case, it's hard to blame people for believing what was being said with the information available, whereas in the past, the Dr. Phil show had cast doubt on the guests and their families by pointing to the possibility of ulterior motives and the fact that certain memories may be corrupted. That didn't really apply here. To be frank, there wasn't a copious amount of new evidence being presented, but these claims were substantiated by what was already publicly available to viewers, and only added an additional layer of credibility to the criticisms being leveled against the Dr. Phil crew. But could it tell us anything about the man himself?
Oh. I like this man's videos. I think they do a pretty good job. I'm glad I was recommending 2 of them. All right.
Yo, those are
we haven't
nice.
had, of course.
Hold on one second.
Candace, what's up? I think my daughter's going pro at basketball.
She's 3.
Other than the lawsuit in 2016, we didn't really have much evidence that supported this idea that Dr. Phil was an outwardly unpleasant person to those around him.
Okay.
And to be fair, you can't control everything.
Yeah, based on his show, I can't say he seems like a very bad person. It seems like he wanted to help people genuinely. He went all the way to Britney Spears' house to attempt to help her. I don't know if he was paid by the hour to go to these places, but he seems like he genuinely wants to help them.
Many would argue that he had presented himself as a hands-on person who cared about making a difference in these people's lives. And this seemed to contradict that. Now, with everything considered, the show still hasn't picked up too much flack. I think mainly because controversy comes with the territory, and such TV shows are never going to be completely unproblematic. Where someone like Ellen was meant to represent an environment where people could just be unbridled in their joy, Dr. Phil thrives on the energy of the guests as well, many of whom bring their own, sometimes less than positive spirit to the stage. That chaos seems more inbuilt with that structure, which unfortunately makes such workplace misconduct stand out less. It's not a surprise that the Dr. Phil machine has mostly persisted, rather unscathed from the troubles of the past few years. However, this hasn't stopped people from asking questions, and I think as skepticism of this form of therapy content in general rises, then people are likely to revisit these claims, and time won't necessarily nullify them. When put together in one place, they do tell a damning story, and one that doesn't present the most flattering image of one of TV's most famous therapists. Creating compelling television is always a struggle, because a lot of people want to see what they often can't see in their own.
Especially now, Gen Z doesn't watch TV. I'm Gen Z. I can say things. A lot of Gen Z, like Twitter, YouTube, like we're more inclined to go on the internet or short-term content like TikTok. So, of course, Dr. Phil is going to do anything to do falsified drama. Why wouldn't they? He's in the process of trying to make money, right? And it's not like early internet times. Like I was going about earlier, like how I was on forums. I've been on the internet for my whole life, right? Forums, YouTube podcasts, things like this. They don't exist as much anymore. It's not like that. So of course Dr. Phil has to reinvent himself, especially because he's still on TV, which is just an older format. TV took radio, and now the internet's taken TV.
Own lives. Therapy is one of those things that is personal. It's between two private individuals, and obviously for many in the psychological field, that confidentiality is part of the process, a place where you can talk about your deepest, darkest thoughts with the hope of eventually expelling them. It's hard to do something publicly when many would argue that privacy is part of its necessity. After all, as people like Daniel Bregoli show, when cameras and audience members are viewing you, you're conditioned to behave differently. However, I also think there is value in people being open about their struggles, and there being a medium to connect with that over. There may not be a right way to do this, but there is a best way to do this. By 2022, I think that critics had lost faith that this was the best way, or that it was even a worthwhile route. Whether it was Dr. Phil's individual will or not, there were clearly conflicts of interest between driving the vehicle that creates entertaining TV and actually protecting the well-being of vulnerable guests. Even discounting the allegations, many of the clips spoke for themselves.
Todd, Dr. Phil.
Hi, I'm Todd.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
This was the guy that was false drunk. The guy that he had drunk in the wall.
I have to have help. Sorry, I'm very...
Although you could certainly attribute certain blame to individuals, I think there was also a great question looming over the show that McGraw operated, particularly regarding its methodology. The prioritization of tell-all television is something that's always been valued in the industry. However, I think there were new elements that Dr. Phil introduced which made that pursuit more dangerous for people who may find themselves in a vulnerable place. In a way, what the Dr. Phil show promotes as its greatest facets were also its greatest problems. We return to this point of help, the one that McGraw helped set the program apart with by collaborating with all these centers and clinics. To me, it seems that the Dr. Phil showrunners either didn't realize the level of heightened responsibility that rested on their shoulders.
How much do you think an entertainment show really helps people?
One allegation in particular comes to mind, that made by the mother who had to visit Skid Row with her daughter, that she'd been told that if she wanted her daughter to receive treatment that they were offering, she would have to cooperate with the narrative being spun on stage. I feel it's a believable scenario.
He's absolutely right. This is
exactly
completely a threat.
I do think it underlines the extremely sensitive power dynamic
no other way to
present
look at
during the show. On one hand, the notion of receiving help is a good idea that hasn't been nearly present in enough of these shows. However, as the only party that can provide that help in these scenarios, there's also an invisible dependence that is experienced by many of the guests. They're relying on the show to offer that help, but that help is chosen by the show and can be withdrawn at any time, as Dr. Phil explained himself.
One thing I knew for sure is that these girls were not ready to be home because home wasn't ready for these girls. I told you that, I was clear about it, and then you say, well, I've actually talked to some other experts. Then you need to do what they want you to do.
Yeah, Dr. Phil doesn't want
to, but I'm not going to support that.
Who wouldn't want to cooperate with Dr. Phil's narratives in these cases, particularly when a person in your relationship with them are at stake?
Yes,
and these people are their friends, their family. Fleeting public dignity is a small price to pay to help your struggling relative to survive. Dr. Phil said that he wasn't involved in the actual treatment after his show, and that statement's falsehood is borderline self-explanatory. If that statement was true, then this dynamic would never have existed, as the help offered would be independent of whatever Dr. Phil says on his show. Instead, they're intertwined. The behavior exhibited on Dr. Phil's show directly influences the treatment that these individuals receive. Their actions on air dictates Dr. Phil's recommendations, despite the many extraneous variables that can influence their deportment during these episodes. Many of these people's progress continues to be covered and critiqued in front of the cameras, even in these clinics and therapy centers. It's part of the show. And if that's the choice of the show, then so be it. But you have to acknowledge that it's a flawed system that can yield some complications, and that it is an effect of the show you operate, regardless of whether you wish to admit it.
But if we're going to do this, we're going to do this my way.
Yeah, his way.
So even
it's
if that
his
help
way or
was
the
flawed,
highway.
Many didn't want to decry it or criticize it because it could influence how they received that help. Dr. Phil's seal of approval propelled a lot of these places into the spotlight, and even if someone had a negative experience with such a place, they may hesitate to speak up if they still had loved ones involved in the treatment. And who would dare question the moral authority of someone as revered as Dr. Phil McGraw? With all this in mind,
a lot of people.
It just makes his first response even worse.
We don't have anything to do with what happens with guests once they leave the stage.
If there is any shred of truth in what he said, it means that he had no investment or interest in the quality of care provided by a lot of these places that he rode so hard for in his shows. And these weren't simple sponsorships that people could go to if they wanted to. These are the places that were offered specifically. And with all this in mind, it becomes hard to buy that Dr. Phil had no knowledge whatsoever of the incidents that occurred at many of these places.
Yes, I'm
his
drinking out of a
response
cup with my
distanced himself
initials
far
on it
too much to the point where it just was not believable. And a more straightforward theory seemed to emerge, that shone a much darker light onto the show and how it had been operated.
How you doing this morning?
Perhaps you know me as the Kung Fu Panda.
Yes, Kung Fu Panda. Jack Black is back. Thank you. You know.
Amongst a quagmire of other shows in the genre that regularly sought to put guests on the spot regarding private affairs, indiscretions, and matters that only really served as entertainment for the
a quagmire is like a swamp area, sticky and everything.
baying crowds. Dr. Phil stood out to many, a beacon in how topics could be tackled on television. Thanks to his skills, McGraw was often able to navigate topics and address guests in ways that appeared fair and astute.
But it's definitely, I'm checking it out now, definitely looking better.
In and of itself a flawed pursuit, because there is no perfection. You know that. Nothing can ever get straight enough, perfect enough, clean enough, right enough. Because if it is, you've got to go back and check it, right?
It didn't just make him popular with audiences who felt his approach represented a more humanized perspective of guests, but also with studios who were often learning the hard way that such formulas could lead to disaster. There's been no large-scale disaster on the Dr. Phil show, nothing that has defined the legacy of the show, and as the ratings of competitors dropped, McGraw's ship remained stable. The lack of emotional provocation directly from Dr. Phil often meant that people really couldn't do much with actual legal complaints. Whatever happened couldn't directly be linked back to an appearance on Dr. Phil. It's not illegal to have guests after all. There has to be some level of personal responsibility, something that Dr. Phil has always preached. In a lot of tabloid talk shows, their format enabled responsibility for any misconduct to be assigned to the producers and the host, because of their language and behavior that may have affected the actions of these guests. Not just on the show, but subsequently after the show. The public crucifixion many people were often subject to was life-ruining, a fate I wouldn't wish.
I was checking out S10's channel for seeing how she was doing. He was doing. My bad. Let's give him a shout out here. Let's look at this clip. Dead.
Keep the pressure on.
Fourth place.
Only 10 were left.
Fourth place is pretty good. Anything above, like fifth and above, I would. Fourth place, you still get a trophy. You're like right on the bottom. Mario Kart considers it good, so the rest of the world. Yeah, no problem. No problem for sure. What did you get to eat, Elena? Was it delicious? Is it delicious? It's morning. It best be delicious.
On nearly anyone. And when these consequences became apparent, I think a lot of people realized TV needed to change. Dr. Phil seemed above that, though.
Two things I'm allergic to. I'm allergic to yeast, gluten, cheese, lactose. I'm allergic to a lot of stuff. I have a lot of health issues.
By this very neutral sphere, where they merely provided a platform for these discussions and interventions to occur.
That sounds good.
Whatever happened otherwise was ultimately the result of decisions made by individuals. This reputation was bolstered by Dr. Phil's image and background, which often applauded him as a professional voice whose words were rooted in scientific observation. Although acknowledging that he was not a medical doctor or even a practicing psychologist, McGraw still leaned into this image, with many products, shows, and public appearances that promoted him as a credible voice within the sphere. All of this established him as a neutral, mild TV personality who merely wanted to teach people some common sense, and his self-titled show followed that formula. This perspective was reflected in Dr. Phil's response to Danielle Bregoli. All he does on the show is sit there and make observations and recommend the support a person should receive. The observational approach prides itself on attempting to dissect these subjects from a factual basis and in a way that...
But is Bregoli actually like... kind of adorable, right? She's pretty adorable. It's true. I kind of want to listen to her music, see what it's like. Got a screenshot because literally you are the first streamer that I have a big motivation to stream. Dude, I just want everyone... It sounds naive. I just want people to be happy more often nowadays. You know, I was talking to the Kingdom here, if we go up in chat. He's talking about killing himself for the 4th suicide attempt. Like, I just think people should be more... It's the way I am, I know, because, you know, I have a religious background and I run a support group for people with depression. I think that not only succeeding in life should not come from the people around you, but how you feel inside. And if you have the motivation to stream, I do this because it brings me joy and it brings people joy. And I think that that's enough motivation. So if I'm bringing you joy to get you motivated to stream, you know what? That's a blessing. Honestly, that's great. I love that.
Allows individuals to present themselves in their unfiltered, unprovoked form. Now, in principle, it was questionable whether such a format could ever be truly neutral. The involvement of an audience, TV cameras, sure, on paper, they're not directly accountable to a studio, but they still influence outcomes of possible interventions and discussions that would regularly refer to intimate and revealing details broadcast out there for eternity. Yet you could defend the show on the basis that there has to be some public exposure for it to constitute a show at all. Nevertheless, there are definitely certain hoops they'd have to jump through to retain this defense, which is what some attention. First, you have that dynamic of dependence between the guest and the showrunners, an unspoken assumed debt, one that could very easily dictate personal behavior and commentary. However, deeper than that, we have the actual alleged conduct undertaken by people working behind the scenes that seem to challenge their guests and their own personal responsibility for their demons. As it's been preached, personal responsibility was extremely important, and as far as we know, the crew of Dr. Phil never forced any guest's hand in their actions. However, on multiple occasions, the Dr. Phil show appeared to be more orchestrated than those behind it were prepared to admit. Their behavior in attempting to make TV more engaging seemed to amount to nudging certain guests towards detrimental actions, not safeguarding vulnerable individuals properly, and prioritizing their business deals and spicy stories over the actual well-being and autonomy of some of those who they covered. Each allegation seemed to tell the same story, that although there seemed to be no active sabotage conducted by producers, they pushed the responsibility of difficult decisions onto distressed guests to generate conflict, which would then be touched on by the surly host, who would hold them accountable.
I have no excuse. I didn't want her to withdraw. I know that we did try and take her to the hospital, and she ended up leaving. I don't have an answer for why I did what I did. I just wanted to help her feel better.
Okay, so this was the lady.
So you got the heroin.
She's not allowed to have a fight with Dr. Phil or this woman won't get help. So yeah, you did have a thought. You're just not allowed to say it because Dr. Phil's a douchebag. Like, come on. This makes him look like the biggest horrible man in the world. That he is literally... This woman is a pregnant heroin addict. And he is neglecting giving her help if the mother doesn't agree with him. Do anyone else see problems with that scenario? Right? There is huge red flags. No, thank you. No, thank you, dude. You're so sweet.
Right? How did you take it?
Huge red flags.
So you bought heroin that she pumped into her veins and therefore into the baby's veins. Yes. So that baby is high on heroin.
It's a very curious connection between many of the stories. This is not one that people would necessarily consciously concoct to be consistent with other claims, but they suggested that the Dr. Phil producers indulged a sweet spot between the show's responsibility and the guest's responsibility. Sure, they didn't necessarily make these guest decisions for them, but they put them in a position where many of them felt like they had no other option, whether that's due to the unspoken dynamic or the outwardly spoken words. Even if it seems like they have a choice, it's almost its own illusion. The presence of an audience makes this even more difficult because given almost all of them are likely to be in favor of Dr. Phil, tries dissent and you're arguing against 100 more people who have complete free reign to vocalize those feelings.
Absolutely.
It's not hard to tell which side they're going to take. We know the central narrative of a show like this will always aim to present Dr. Phil lifting people out of a struggle. He has to be their savior, but they shouldn't have to manipulate scenarios to ensure that a person has a struggle to be lifted out of. As their PR guru once said, those people were already encountering difficulties at the time that they arrived. What happens at the show may not have too much of a direct bearing on those specific issues, yet just because someone is suffering from a problem doesn't mean that an appearance on public television is just like any other Tuesday when addressing it. That sort of show can be a make or break situation for a person's well-being. You see, whereas Greenberg's statement was used to defer responsibility, many would use it to bestow greater responsibility. Just because someone is fighting their own personal battle doesn't mean you can't provide some reinforcements here or there, and you have to make the best TV out of it. Although they had established a prestige amongst many viewers as the show that provided the most sincere platform for people to share their struggles, their setup enabled a bulletproof formula that would yield the results they wanted, reaping the credit for everything that went right without making them too responsible for the things that went wrong, exploiting nearly every medium possible to maximize their own success. But in spite of its continued success, are the curtains finally coming down on this iconic daytime show?
Man, I hope. I want to say that I've never seen an episode of Dr. Phil, and I never will, because I don't really care about TV shows at all, TV drama.
The year is 2022, and Dr. Phil has been up and running for 20 seasons. It has outlasted nearly every tabloid talk show, a majority of normal talk shows, including Oprah, and still pulls significant viewership. He must have done something right. Well, in many ways, Dr. Phil achieved a feat unrivaled by nearly every other daytime show. Regardless of when or how it ends, it will have irrevocably changed many people's lives, for better and sometimes for worse. McGraw has influenced multiple generations of people on how they may approach the topics of mental health and many other sensitive subjects surrounding the matter, which is probably why people find the show such a hotbed for modern-day discussion. It's influenced how people seek help, put a face on a lot of unknown conditions, and platformed important discussions that were often considered too taboo for mainstream television.
I just want it to stop. I want to be able to get along with him. I do love him with my whole heart.
Are these real tears? Like, I can't tell if these are real tears. Is that an ag round? Hold on, I'm gonna...
Then he needs to be worthy of that. And treating you with dignity and respect is an entry-level beginning.
There's no doubt that many of those subjects covered by Dr. Phil will remain relevant for decades to come, but will the man himself be at the forefront of it? With all that's been discussed today, I'm not entirely sure. Dr. Phil's venture into the online community definitely gave him and the show a second wind that very few could have probably predicted. It made him relevant with a new audience and refreshed him in the memory of old ones. However, success in the online world does come with the acknowledgement that you don't always have the control of public perception that you might have on other mediums. It didn't help that at its core, Dr. Phil was still old-school syndicated television. They didn't really adjust their rules depending on who was watching or talking about them. Certain pursuits that became quite easy to criticize were picked up on, and even though it was likely...
The man doesn't understand the modern internet. He doesn't understand... I'm sure Dr. Phil hasn't took his phone out and typed Rule 34 yet. Okay? Until you know the 65 rules of the internet, you ain't, like... part of our generation, okay? I don't think he's done that.
Fairly standard procedure when the show was launched. By this time, people clearly realized...
I don't think Dr. Phil has been on Tumblr. Like, you think Dr. Phil's ever seen a picture of a furry before? I doubt it. I didn't catch it.
Had to be somewhat more rigorous moral standards with the content he was producing, and when he eventually got involved in the pinnacle of what every online figure dreads, drama, his response was clearly taken from the TV template of admitting nothing. The only problem was that it just wasn't believable at all. In 2018, owing to its continued success, Dr. Phil was renewed for an additional 4 seasons running up until May 2023. This was quite the feat, all things considered. However, in the last couple years, it has lost its syndicated crown to other shows, including Live with Kelly and Ryan and The View. Now, this isn't to say the ratings still haven't been strong. Dr. Phil still pulls a significant viewership, all things considered. Whereas in March 2020, he was pulling a Nielsen rating of 2.8. By the end of 2021, that had dropped to 1.4, and it seems somewhat uncertain if there will be a further extension to the show's lifespan. On the basis of the numbers alone, I'd say they have reason to renew. However, on the basis of the trend, I'd say they're probably aware of the risk. In August 2022, for the start of season 21, they laid off 25 staffers in a move to cut costs. And although the studio downplayed the move, it's hard to ignore such significant downsizing, especially given the stories that had come out over the year before. The only real piece of good news for the show came from the result of the lawsuit regarding Turnabout Ranch, which judge dismissed as ultimately not having strong enough grounds to pursue. Having probably the most TV company move of them all, the response of the Dr. Phil show was to request the court to have the former guest, Archuleta, pay them $400,000 in legal fees.
That's a lot of dollars.
Which seems just a bit tasteless considering the sensitivity of the case and the fact that a separate lawsuit against Turnabout Ranch has yet to be concluded. But that's just my take. I could point towards one specific story and say that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, but really I think it's just a result of gradual attrition, a formula being worn to the bone, and people finally realizing it wasn't the TV that it claimed to be. I think that back in the day, when it was competing with shows that regularly skewered their guests and made the grandest spectacle of each situation, Dr. Phil could be that more humane alternative. With the rise of the internet and Dr. Phil's own participation in it, they found themselves out of step with more refined documentaries and psychological analyses of situations by accredited experts who treat these topics with much more reverence than Dr. Phil ever did. McGraw's show still has the edge in the fact that it often directly involves these subjects and the fact that they can actually offer treatment and coverage of such. But that has been overshadowed by the questions surrounding a lot of these treatment centers and Dr. Phil's own relationship with them. YouTubers who worked with counseling site BetterHelp came under criticism after the company found themselves mired in controversy regarding the status of some professionals, and some creators were thought to have not actually used the site they were promoting. That is a drop in the ocean compared to what McGraw has appeared to greenlight. The lawsuit regarding Turnabout Ranch has also further torn a hole in that previously impenetrable reputation. Although lawsuits were not necessarily anything new to Dr. Phil, and certainly this result wasn't, the media coverage, the names attached, and the possible precedent that could have been set if they had found McGraw and his crew culpable for their recommendation is enough to give many studios cold feet. This probably wouldn't have even been conceivable when the show started up in the early 2000s, with TV the medium and guests making 1 or 2 appearances before being forgotten in the run of episodes. With the online world immortalizing much of this content, mostly at the behest of Dr. Phil's production team, their strength of reaching a new audience is also that vulnerability. Like a lot of TV shows and even media in general, Dr. Phil was ahead of its time when it made its debut, but has fallen behind the evolving zeitgeist as the years have passed, and it seems too resistant to the change it would need to undertake to overcome that. Maybe Phil's format just wasn't capable of something more human. Or maybe it was, but wasn't prepared to make that change.
I believe I can bring him really quality help, and I think he can respond to that. And I think he probably will.
In principle, I don't think it would be completely impossible to overhaul the current system in place. However, I think the issue is that when a show becomes so established...
Probably will. I could find... Like, he's talking all in assumptions, and... Basically, I'm saying it's legal speak, so he can get out of any trouble.
Over a long period of time, it digs its roots in, which makes it very difficult for certain changes to be effected. The additional problem is that your remaining audience may only be comfortable with your current format, so even if your numbers are down currently, you still risk distancing the loyal viewers by completely renovating the show that so many of those viewers have come to appreciate. But is it radical to ask for a bit more humanity? Arguably, much of what we discussed today wouldn't necessarily require that many adjustments, just a heightened sensitivity and improved safeguarding. However, even that may be a bit too much for a show that at its core still thrived on the drama that it superficially seemed to seek distance from. And to be brutally honest, maybe that's what people wanted.
No, we wanted a gotcha game called Sunless Zone Zero. Oh, it's an ad. The counseling of Dr. Phil. Holy crap.
We discussed in the past in the Ellen video. One of the aspects of a modern talk show that appeals to so many people is this thought that what you're receiving is an unfiltered, authentic version of a person. Unfortunately, Hollywood ruins most things, and for studios it often seems easier to manufacture the illusion of an authentic atmosphere than to actually craft one organically. Yet if people are none the wiser to this assembly, then who can it harm? Well, on principle, it doesn't have to harm anyone if it's managed correctly. The problem is that a formula based on deception doesn't tend to attract the most sincere characters, and when you're dealing with topics like mental health, there tends to be more at stake. You can't blame audiences for only seeing what they want to see, because in truth they often only see what the TV producers want to see. But anything catered to being more realistic would probably undermine the studio's version of how authentic such TV shows should appear. Every show has an angle because it's what sells. Dr. Phil was often presented as a selfless endeavor, an altruistic drive to help people beat their demons and get their lives back on track. Finally, a format for a show based around the needs of a guest. However, I think over time it became clear to audiences that it wasn't exactly about helping. It was more about people believing you're helping. We've already addressed how cameras affect the guests on the show, but the cameras also affect Dr. Phil. And when they were rolling, people received a seemingly measured and earnest persona, but a persona nonetheless. This was a one-man franchise. Anything that threatened that image was quickly dispatched of.
Good morning to you, Ty.
Hey, bump fights, baby.
Is that a wig you're wearing?
No. Real hair.
Real hair. Just curious, because I understand you're not using your real name, and I wonder why that is.
Well, no, Ty Beeston is my real name. I'm a film student out of USC.
His name's Ty Beeston. He's definitely real.
The footage.
That's a real-looking man.
Now it's out.
And now the police come calling.
Well, I'm not worried about it. I don't think I've done anything wrong.
It's been a long video, but I do have one more story for you.
One more story.
Yes, and this so that has acquired internet fame, allegedly involving the creator of Bum Fights, Ty Beeson, is often pointed to by critics as a perfect example of what we're discussing today.
Now, I have to warn you, some of this footage that you're about to see is clearly inappropriate for young viewers. Please ask your children to leave the room. And I'm serious, you really don't want your kids watching this, and it's not going to be fun for you to see it. But we have to be aware of what's floating around out there and what our kids have access to.
Bum Fights is a rather grim series of films designed to exploit homeless people by making them participate in often quite dangerous antics. And so it made sense that they would be subject to criticism from someone like McGraw, who would obviously find such content abhorrent on the grounds of its inhumanity. This seemed like the perfect opportunity to pick someone apart for their actions. And yet...
I've made multi-millions off the Bum Fights video series. I'm not surprised at my success. It's a sick world.
Stop the tape. Stop the tape. I don't want to talk to you.
Why not?
That's despicable. I don't want to talk to you. You can go. I just watched that footage, and that is absolutely despicable, and I refuse to publicize that.
In the moment, it seemed that McGraw, so roused by the content he watched, had made an active decision to not indulge this heartless troll. A harrowing moment of principle from the doctor himself. He credits this stance as it's a matter that is clearly very personal to him, as he said he has been homeless too. Yet, he's interviewed worse people, hasn't he? I mean, what is so exceptional about this guy?
If you think I exploit people, every time you bring a guest on this show, you exploit them and spread whatever the problems they have to the whole world. You think that's helping them?
Yeah, keep telling yourself that. You can go.
Ah, well, you see, he's dressed in rather interesting attire. You could go as far to say him and Dr. Phil have practically matching suits. As that clip just illustrated, it wasn't done without purpose. As a matter of fact, it seems Beeson wanted to take the opportunity to make a "you and I ain't so different" type speech. Now, I would say that Bum Fights is somewhat worse than Dr. Phil on the basis of its premise, and I think McGraw could have made that case for himself. But clearly anticipating that it's an argument he does not want to have, he pulls the plug on the interview. Now, this isn't exactly an admission that Beeson is in fact correct, but for a man who is so sure-footed on the narratives he propounds and the judgments he makes on other people, you'd think he'd be at least able to stand up for himself. And yet he can't even answer as the creator of one of the most philistine forms of modern media. If it truly was a matter that caused McGraw to feel so strongly to the point where he didn't want to give this guy the time of day, he shouldn't have let him on the show in the first place. Dismissing the guy when he was actively there before he could even say anything was probably the most cowardly thing to do. Phil saw this guy coming and realized it wasn't going to be your usual dunking. If it was truly about the people that Dr. Phil sought to help or address, he would have no reservations going toe-to-toe with some of the most questionable figures in modern culture. Like a lot of the old talk show hosts from the 60s. But it's always a question of control for McGraw, and they can't afford an episode which even makes him look remotely out of his depth. There has to be a predictability about how these guests are going to behave so that McGraw can assert control over the situation. So that if they concur with him, they're engaging positively with his narrative, or if they are so bold to try and detract from them, the show has a way to discredit what they say, whether they're young, intoxicated, or just mentally unstable. The last part I requested more humanity, but humanity is a two-way street, and to require more humanity from the show would require more humanity from Dr. Phil. And I think it's just too much to ask from a show that has prided itself on having a superhuman host. After all, he's just a little sensitive.
It's the love story of the century.
He has extreme narcissism.
Never
We've determined that.
Physically met.
No, sir. And y'all can laugh at me. Fine. I will be your spectacle. I will be your laughing spectacle. You can all laugh at me. It's fine.
You know what? I think we're just going to shut this down because I'm not into all this melodrama and you playing the victim and everything. So you're saying the audience is making a spectacle out of you. That's not what I'm about. That's not what I do. I had you come here to help you, and you're saying people are ridiculed, making fun of you. You're going to be a spectacle. I don't want to be any part of that.
I used the word Messiah earlier, and I 100% meant it. Dr. Phil's show is structured off making the title character seem like that savior at any and all costs, that he is right. But the truth is that nobody, not even a therapist, can fulfill that image. And any show that provides that impression is not being honest with its guests or its audience. Problem is that when you successfully sell that image, not only are you selling an unrealistic expectation of therapy to millions of people, you aren't creating a fair environment for a struggling guest to actually find the support they need. It means that any actual treatment doesn't have to be catered to the individual, more to a show's agenda. And if it doesn't work, you can push responsibility onto the guest for not being receptive enough. It's the Seymour Skinner complex of asking whether your form of therapy didn't work and then concluding that it must be the patient who's wrong. It's built off this idea purported to audiences that it's Dr. Phil offering a service to these people, when in reality, it's quite the opposite.
This has just gone in a really bad direction. I'm going to talk with Jasmine. I'm going to talk with your mother, and I'm just going to let you head on home. and go, because I'm not going to play.
Is there anything I can say to fix this? I'm so sorry.
No, all of this melodrama about ridiculing the audience and they can laugh at you and all that. I don't play those kind of games. You're very manipulative, and I'm not interested in all of that.
Although there would be no show without cameras and no narrative without the producers, there would be no Dr. Phil without the guests. They provide the show.
Here's the thing. She's not even manipulative like she's trying to be. No. It's that he is unable to control that narrative and provide his own form of thoughts onto her. That's exactly what happened. So that's why he shut down the show. It's because he couldn't control that person. She was going to do what she wanted to do, and there was nothing he could do to stop it.
With years of timeless stories and harrowing accounts receiving very little from it in return, their benefit, the hope for recovery, which really should be provided regardless of financial incentive, is the least they deserved. And sometimes that wasn't even viable. There are so many people, famous celebrities, enshrined through the lens of modern media, who could be picked out at their weakest point and put under that Dr. Phil microscope. And the man himself is no exception.
Dragon Ball card game, yeah. Ooh, okay. Canceling Dr. Phil, huh? I don't think... I don't...
Cancel culture. It's a phrase that's been used in all...
Look, there's only a very few people... I said this at the beginning. There's very few people that are immune to cancel culture. And you know who's immune to it? You got Logan Paul up there, right? He's immune to it. But anyone else... And there's a few people, but I can't, he's the main one that comes to mind. Because, he showed like a dead body on a video and he's still around. So, I don't think Dr. Phil's immune to cancel culture.
Online circles to nauseating degrees. I don't want to go too much into detail about it right now, but it's difficult to even give a basic rundown of the definition because there are so many interpretations of it, to the point where some people don't even believe it exists. I think mainly because the sphere of discussion is dominated by super celebrities who are almost immune to ever having their voices silenced anyway. However, our good friend Dr. Phil McGraw has been an outspoken critic of it, appearing on interviews to call out the harmfulness of the culture. But speaking is one thing. Does his show reflect that philosophy? Well, to many, cancel culture seems like a new phenomenon, and the presence of mob mentality online definitely highlights its failings. But in many cases, I think it's just a repackaging of something that's long existed, and it's not something that affects everybody equally.
We are in a bubble. We don't want to talk to anyone that doesn't agree with our thinking. And if someone says something that is offensive to our sensibilities, then people go on the attack, and they may choose a wrong word. And instead of saying, maybe messaging them in some way, saying, hey, listen, you may not know it, but that could be offensive to someone. Instead, they start bombarding them with boycott messages, telling them they hope they die. I'm going to slit your throat in the night. Just horrible things.
In 1988, when McGraw was actually working as a psychologist, he was reprimanded and penalized for hiring a former patient of his for part-time employment. The patient in question also made claims suggesting inappropriate contact by McGraw. However, the board's review did not conclude in the patient's favor on that front. Now, I'm not going to comment on that which is disputed, and there are other serious claims against him that are tied up in legal proceedings which I won't be exploring today. However, I will say that it is Therapy 101 that you do not develop a personal or business relationship with one of your patients outside of your practice.
Right.
It's not a healthy dynamic, and the fact that someone seemingly as stoic as McGraw could allow that to happen is certainly a stark reminder that TV hosts are not all they represent sometimes. Now that's over 30 years ago, and I think one of the uglier aspects of cancel culture is ruining someone's career for historic indiscretions. I believe that broadly speaking, people deserve the chance to grow and change, and that ruining someone's livelihood is seldom the solution. In his case, the board's solution was for McGraw to be supervised until they were satisfied their conditions were met. To many, this would seem like a fair and proportionate response from the board. Would Dr. Phil agree? McGraw has been outspoken on the benefits of his show and even that he believes it's a fair basis for conflict resolution. So all I'd ask is this: if McGraw genuinely believes in his own approach to therapy, would he have subjected himself to it when he found himself facing serious criticism in 1988? Although I can't look inside his mind, my prediction would be a resounding no. Why? Because he knows better than anyone.
I'm sorry to hear that, S10.
one that you have very little control over how you're going to be perceived or presented. Dr. Phil emphasizes responsibility, but when you as a person have no control over what the TV producers do, what Dr. Phil says, or how your own words may even be twisted and used against you, you can't be responsible for that. Yet you'll believe it because you were the person who chose to go on the show in the first place. Audiences can pretend to be better, but if the performance of YouTube videos tell us anything, is that people are much more interested in the deterioration than they are the recovery. People are going to be remembered online for decades for often their lowest points in their life, will likely be judged for behavior they may have long corrected, even though in hindsight the flaws of these shows seemed abundantly clear. Most of the longest running shows in this genre, like Springer, Carl, and even Jones, were often the most provocative and controversial. Many of them were rather gross, relied on stereotypes and tropes related to people's backgrounds or identity, and if the same formula was applied with more subtlety with Dr. Phil, it would hardly be surprising as it seems inbuilt with the genre. Even beyond the concept alone, the numerous allegations that Dr. Phil producers went out of their way to make people seem worse than they actually were on screen. Isn't that the core of said culture that McGraw would decry in interviews? You see, although I think in many ways provocative hosts were likely detrimental to guests during their TV appearances, it at least gave audiences some idea of how responsibility can be shared in these situations. I don't think most people are emotionally unintelligent. I think they can recognize when a frenzied situation arises, and it's hard to control. Dr. Phil, on the other hand, built a brand off being the reasonable guy, and it's ingenious optics really, because I think in appearing measured and reasonable, he succeeds in making his guests, who are often put on the spot, look much rather like the opposite. And if the allegations are true, then in many ways they were much more insidious in their technique than many other hosts who were outwardly, on the surface, more objectionable. Everyone looks at social media as the sole cause of cancellation, but TV has been cancelling people for decades, whether that be their social standing amongst their peers or the lives that have been lost due to it. It's happened to high-profile people who have been forgotten, and low-profile people who, as far as most of us know, never existed. The internet certainly amplifies elements of it, and it's not healthy, but a lot of people have been looking down on these people struggling before the internet ever began to have any sort of influence in these people's lives. The only way you can come out a winner in the eyes of the audience is if you cooperate with a show's narrative and let the help they offer change you for the better. Places like Turnabout. It's not authentic though, and some people will fall at that hurdle. It's not their fault.
Are you sure places like Turnabout didn't pay Dr. Phil to go onto the show to advertise?
That an aggressive form of therapy wasn't for them, but the show will sure make it seem like it. Framing is everything. We live in an era where people seem to empathize more with fictional characters than real people because of it. TV series like Barry or Better Call Saul are far superior psychological analyses of complex characters. And sure, it's hard to find people like that for a tabloid talk show, and you might not want to. But when there are shows that contextualize mass murderers and the literal devil better than you can a drug-addicted teen, then maybe you're doing something wrong. And once these people are off your show, they can do very little to change that image in an industry that favors large companies with lawyers on retainer. Everyone's an actor when they know a camera's on.
Bailey, how are you?
Not good.
Yeah, why is that?
I was told that y'all brought someone here that I explicitly said not to bring.
Anywho, back to your stream, ND stream as well. Welcome back. Thank you.
Yeah, who's that?
My biological mother.
Would you like to leave? Because you can certainly leave, because nobody tells me who to put on my show, including you.
Times are changing though. Gone are the Beeson days where you'd be thrown off or torn apart if you had anything to say against McGraw. People who have been subject to grilling on these shows are finding themselves with a greater platform to finally express their own perspectives. Ones that would never have been broadcast elsewhere because they didn't fit the narrative. People like Brigoli, whose case would have otherwise been lost to the sands of time, have been able to use their former notoriety to actually amplify their own voice in discussing their experience on the show, and the subsequent treatment they were subjected to. Someone like commentators followed suit. YouTuber Jacko has released a very compelling set of videos covering many of these scandals, which I definitely recommend, with further strong contributions coming from many corners of the internet. It's very valiant for Dr. Phil to start discussing cancel culture now in the way that he has, but one can't help thinking where this discussion was when he was publicly roasting parents for not raising children as he thought they should in front of millions of viewers, and roasting those children too. I don't know what he thinks is so different about the online world that makes his cause specifically so righteous.
Nothing. Guys, it's time for you each to take responsibility for what part of this you own. And Diane, you're blaming Ron, and Ron, you're blaming Diane. But let me assure you, nobody nobody is responsible for your feelings and your actions but yourself.
It's ironic. What could prove to be the Achilles heel of Dr. Phil may be the very responsibility that McGraw has continuously advocated for. Once again, one can't help wonder what he would say to himself now if he was a guest on his own show. So I guess I'll say it to him. Yes, cancel culture is real and can genuinely harm decent people trying to better themselves. I'm glad you care about it. But it's a culture that everyone, yourself included, has participated in at some point in their lives. Suddenly taking an interest when people have become capable of calling you out seems a bit too coincidental. I know it's a trending topic right now, and obviously the phrase has helped amplify the discussion surrounding it. But most of Phil's discourse centers around people who clearly haven't been cancelled, alongside interviews with pop culture and political loudmouths who use these narratives to actually increase their influence.
I can't believe how my fellow liberals are behaving. What is liberal about cancelling everybody and anything that you don't happen to agree with? It's a complete nonsense.
Listen, there's been attempts to cancel me before cancel culture was a thing. I'm an outspoken conservative. That's something that I'm used to.
A lot of large celebrities seem to conflate ordinary people having a platform to respond to them, maybe sometimes rather unpleasantly, with actual threats to their careers, when in many cases they'll never experience that. There are examples where shows and institutes have been pressured to drop certain public figures, and those reasons have been tenuous or driven by personal vendettas. I have never agreed with that, and I am broadly a free speech person, but even then, it seldom targets celebrities, often academics, smaller companies, those who can't actually afford to fight for themselves. Dr. Phil can. It's clear that he has, and it's clear that he will continue to. However, his takes on cancel culture aren't those of a psychologist, they're those of someone who simply isn't as untouchable as they previously were. But sometimes that is for the best. Just like the Psychology Board's verdict in 1988 wasn't cancel culture, neither is this. At the start of the video, I posed a simple question that was likely being asked by many ambitious producers at the time of Dr. Phil's first appearance on TV. If we combined a talk show host with a specialist in a specific academic area, what would the result be? Well, obviously Dr. Phil is only one possible outcome, but from this one little case study, I'd say that it yielded an impressive yet hollow spectacle, one that flaunted all the credentials of our savant in question, but had no way to effectively utilize it in a format that maintained a balance between entertainment and humanity, instead leaning into the former at the expense of the latter, in pursuit of those ratings. But I suppose that's not necessarily a surprise.
In abusing people and using them for money, and they're taking their emotions and using it for money, is the American way. Like, are we even talking? We're talking about the same country here. Like, yeah, greed is the root of all evil, okay? But using someone's emotions to gather more clicks is evil, and yet that's the American way, so we have to abide by it. Like, that's
what these studios know best, and anything that may allow the competition to have an edge over them should be considered as fair game. It's the survival of the fittest environment, and it's what keeps a lot of people in their jobs. However, just because it's the natural thing to do, it's the right thing to do. And over time, as people's moral compasses have adjusted, the format of Dr. Phil has become unpalatable with more and more viewers. Combined with some allegations that completely contradict the image that Dr. Phil would claim to project, and the continued poor responses made by employees and even McGraw himself, it's not a surprise that some people are switching off or switching over. Dr. Phil taught many how to sympathize with those struggling, but now people are working out how to empathize with them as well. Dr. Phil taught many how to seek out help, but now many are learning that there are different types of help, and that there's never a one-size-fits-all solution.
No.
In both cases, it makes Dr. Phil's approach seem a little outdated. People's understanding of mental health has evolved greatly in the last couple decades, and I'm glad we're garnering a greater understanding of the challenges and troubles that people face. Although we still have a long way to go, I think many have begun to understand how public therapy is a bit of an oxymoron. It's a difficult topic to navigate, and Dr. Phil has likely put a fair few conversations surrounding mental health on the map. I don't want to void him of any credit whatsoever. We want to live in a world where these topics aren't too difficult to address and pay attention to, but we also need to make sure that those people who may be the center of the discourse can at least represent themselves how they wish to, free of narratives that wish to box them in or present a third party as the hero of the situation. Dr. Phil didn't steal the limelight completely for himself, but it's natural for a TV show to bolster their reputation by crediting themselves with the positive stories and outcomes of guests who have appeared on there. People saying, "Thank you, Dr. Phil," and viewers clapping while he strolls around because it's just another day at the office for him. And I think the contrast of blaming the guest when something doesn't work out...
Well, they probably say thank you, Dr. Phil, because they know they'll get more attention.
...creates a very unsavory juxtaposition. Although there are lots of people and factors that can aid a person's recovery, it's you who has made those changes, and you should never let anyone take that credit away from you. It's not easy, it's a minefield of shit to navigate that may occasionally challenge you to confront bad habits. But even if it's entirely your fault that you landed yourself in shit in the first place and you're merely going back to where you started from, it's still worthy of recognition. Although it's not the entire story, I do think that to make stories more centered around the people who actually are encountering these struggles, you have to decentralize the system that covers these stories. And that's antithetical to the nature of a talk show. That's why I think Dr. Phil is probably too rigid to make that change, because they probably have to scrap the one thing that appealed to audiences in the first place, Dr. Phil himself. He's a knowledgeable and intelligent individual, but he's part of a system that has fallen behind what a lot of people are looking for. And how long he can retain his viewership amongst a manifestation of claims and lawsuits that seem to have greater media presence than ever is a question that will only be revealed with time. Maybe if Dr. Phil does come to an end, we will have some clarity on what happened behind the scenes from people who no longer have a commitment to the show. But who knows when that's going to happen? It's unclear what the future of the Dr. Phil show has in store, but whether it continues for another 20 years or isn't renewed past 2023, its legacy is definitely going to be the source of debate for time to come. However, there are some judgments that can be made. At its best, the producers of Dr. Phil didn't properly make sure their guests stayed in a safe place as they should have, and at their worst, they could have exposed guests to the very vices they were claiming to remedy, very possibly intentionally. Now, in most cases, Dr. Phil did provide care for people after their appearance, though there are obvious exceptions. However, is the help that comes after worth the humiliation and conflict that comes during? It's a question worth asking, particularly when that help was structured around its own business model, whether that meant shipping celebrities off to facilities in specific places or sending children to boarding schools or treatment centers in different states.
Well, it's hard to believe that 21 years ago I made my very first appearance on The Oprah Show. And together we launched Dr. Phil in 2002.
And it does sadden me in a way, because in watching a lot of episodes,
I'm a year older than the show.
I've seen the positive changes made by the show. I have seen people genuinely find the help they need. I have seen some really harrowing interviews with people who have been through hell. Dr. Phil isn't this universal negative, and I don't want to make it out to be that. But it is a product of an era that isn't as human as it needs to be. I said at the start that as preached on the show, the first step to making a change in your life is acknowledging responsibility. Something that many of us have done, but something that many of these shows seem to be allergic to. Possibly for legal reasons, I don't know for sure. Maybe for that reason, they'll never evolve, but I do want to give some words of advice in the instance that that is something they're interested in. If it wants to at least try and keep up with the changing zeitgeist, there needs to be changes. This isn't 2002 anymore. There should be more diligence about how guests are treated on and off the show,
for sure,
and how the show presents their stories. They shouldn't let guests put themselves at risk with substances and alcohol in their care, regardless of the TV that it may engender. They shouldn't crucify teens and youngsters because they're behaving badly. If they want to make a positive difference, put some money aside towards their treatment and protect their identities a little better. They're troubled as anyone, and crafting narratives about how they're the offspring from hell only boxes in their image and challenges them to rebel at one of the most rebellious points in their lives.
Coming off the show.
How they can think that helps is beyond me. And it's definitely something that needs to change in my opinion. Whether they choose to take that advice is their decision. I'm sure McGraw and all will be living alright either way if their net worth is anything to go by. But if they also care about the well-being of their guests, it might just be worth considering. Dr. Phil McGraw and all those behind Dr. Phil did something unprecedented. They took tabloid talk shows to the next level and showed many in the genre that there could be a more dignified element. But not every episode had to end with some sort of row. However, by holding on to some of the more tabloid aspects of the original formula, they eventually fell into the same pitfalls that many other shows of their time had. Whether they'll be remembered for those pitfalls or their success stories is something only time will tell. And maybe they still have time to change that. But it's something whose extent we'll probably only fully know when Dr. Phil is cancelled. The show, that is, not the person. You know, that was the pun. I'm really funny.
Yeah, that's it. Oh.
So yeah, that was the video.
Okay. So yeah, that was super good. This was a great one. The first one? What do you mean the first one? Hold on. Let me do my little outro here. For those on YouTube, I will see you tomorrow. For those on Twitch, we'll be streaming the next episode. I mean, the we're going to stream Elena's video she sent me. That video for YouTube will come out tomorrow, and but I want to thank everyone for watching my reaction to this. I hope you all enjoyed it. I know a lot of you put me down on in the background, but I still really appreciate all of you watching and putting me here. It's a really thoughtful thing. So yeah, I'll see you then.